Hi, this is Kate Rains, and welcome to Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Children's Literature. That's a mouthful, and there's reasons for that, which we will get into. But first, I want to just quickly establish via helpful Wikipedia, so therefore, not all the way there necessarily, but a bit of a time frame for Asian immigration into the United States. Started way back, 1830s. Right? Look at that. Filipinos known as Luzon Indians. These Luzonians were part of a crew, that probably a kidnapped crew, right? And landing party of a Spanish ship. Then we have a major wave, 1850 through 1924, mostly to Hawaii. So we've got lots of groups from China, Japan, Korea, India, and the Philippines. And then we have a more present wave. Well, 1965 isn't that present for some of you or all of you. At the end of a couple of wars, Korean War and the Vietnam War, and some secret wars that I don't know anything about in Southeast Asia, brought another wave of Asian American immigrants from Korea, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So we're looking at huge immigration patterns here. The 1850s, the gold rush brought tons of Asian immigration, more specifically Chinese American, Japanese, Korean, and South Asian immigrants were all coming through during that time. So here's the big question. No, not here's the big question. Why is this question always asked? No, where are you really from? Okay, so we're looking at 1830s. We have the beginning of immigrations to the United States of Asian immigrants from all over the place, right? So why are we always asking that? What is it about specifically, it seems to me, addressing this question to Asian Americans? It just seems this is there's a parody of this linked in your Canvas, so check it out because it's pretty hilarious and really pointed, really just right on the target. Perpetual foreigner in one's own land, a big, big theme, and it has been a theme until fairly recently when we look at Asian American children's literature as well. So when we're looking at this wonderful variety of ethnicities, check it out, right? So about 85% of all Asian Americans originated from these chunks in the pie. There's a lot here. And then we are adding and have fairly recently added, gotten more specific about some of our Asian American population, and that specifically includes this group from the Hawaiian Islands, mostly. So there's an interesting dilemma about that whole island Pacificer sort of designation within the Asian American umbrella because of just the type of struggle that was that transpired for all of these different populations, right? So the Pacific Islanders were trying to fight off people invading them and their land and taking over their land, which is a different start for our other Asian immigrations. Does that make sense? So that's, who knows where the politically correct title will go. And I'm not saying that sarcastically, because I believe very truly in the fact that I need to address people by their designated moniker, right? By what they want to be called. And so it's going to change. And that's how it should be. So right now I'm going with Asian Pacific Islander Desi Americans. And there's an incredible amount of diversity, right? Just incredible. It's so exciting. Sorry. That's beside the point. And so our census 2019 was about the earliest I could get it. No, not the earliest, the latest. And so it's just interesting to look at this and realize that the biggest populations right here reflect more than a couple of ethnicities, right? But what do in the good old US of A? We lump everybody together. And we mostly think somebody is Chinese or Japanese descent. Because we meaning white, well, mostly white, citizens get to do this kind of stuff, ask where you're from, and assume that if you're Asian American, that you fall under either Japanese American or Chinese American. And the deal with that is because that was about the only exposure that a lot of people growing up in the United States got in their history books, was mostly about Chinese and Japanese Americans, and just, the route as to which they came into the United States. And so really what we get is very negative, really off-putting kind of images in our earlier history books. Hopefully that's changed. Kind of a feeling it hasn't changed as much as it should. Well, I don't even have a feeling. I just easily can say that, right? And so we just have the Chinese and Japanese immigrants being portrayed as like, get out of here, you're no good, go away, you don't belong. And it really came to bear in about 1882 when there was enacted the Chinese Inclusion Act. And this is, I have a better version of it, just a second. This is an advertisement for some laundry soap. So saying, get out of here and you're no good. And so the laundry soap people were saying, use this magic washer if you don't want to be dirty. And so all sorts of really awful references, right, to the Chinese immigrants that came in and worked their butts off, of course, for little, and then were asked to leave. That was an exclusion act that permanently banned them, and so which was really impactful for let's see how many decades, about 6 decades or so. And again, the whole idea that come to our lands, the America that welcomes everyone. This act really kind of did its number on racism in the United States. That's my take as a white privileged teacher here through my white lenses and looking at history and trying to piece everything together to try to get a better and more accurate idea of what really was going on. I feel like after some of the reading I've done recently that this has been the Chinese 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act has really stayed with us. So with that, we decided, okay, we're going to start picking and choosing who gets to come into the land of the free, right? And the deal with that Exclusion Act, that it didn't only, impact the Chinese immigrants coming in or trying to come in for citizenship. It swept up all sorts of Asian immigrants trying to come in. And there is a talk and theory now that whole beginning of the end of being embracive and inclusive in the United States, which is not really true because we could argue everything with slavery. So I just won't go down that road. But the myth of pretending like we were inclusive has really reared its ugly head time and time again with some recent hate crimes, right? Big hate crimes. So I don't know why I just kind of looked at it today and realized that it was so much more important than I ever thought. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit more. It's just so interesting now. We just keep going over the same loops of racism, right? Just on and on. So we see it in the news all the time. It plays out, repeats itself. And for our Japanese American citizens during the World War II, what is it, started in 1942? Did it? I think. Tons of Japanese Americans lost everything, all of their possessions, their property, everything, because once Japan dropped the bomb on Pearl Harbor, Japanese American citizens who had gone back 4 generations were now considered foreigners and were considered enemies and were swept up and put into internment camps. And I'm going to call them internment camps. I'd like to actually call them something else, but I won't because it might be offensive. So they were labeled, said, grab a couple bags, you're out of here. So what a horrific thing, right? Some of the things we've been able to do. It's crazy. So in terms of Asian American stereotypes, besides that they're foreigners and enemies, are going to take over all of our jobs, all the stereotypes. We have one that's supposedly positive, the model minority, because, oh my gosh, these Asian immigrants came over here, and we're talking, in more contemporary times, and they've just succeeded compared to all the other people coming over or living here, all the other people of color. They're just brilliant. They play a couple of instruments. They're good at math. They're everything, right? So that model minority stereotype, unfortunately, pits Asian American citizens against other people of color citizens, right? So just let's keep everything distracted and keep the dominant culture, the white dominant culture, totally up at the top because of this, right? And I like this, despite the privileges that I may at times enjoy from being cast as a model minority. Histories tell us that the label is dangerous. Yeah. So again, just a brief kind of overview from my white curated eyes as to some of the difficulties that have just poured right into children's literature, Asian American children's literature, right? Because the idea is that this stereotype just prevails, that, yeah, you're never going to belong. You've been here forever. You're never going to belong. You're frozen in time. We make you exotic and long gone, just kind of like the American Indian lecture, and just like kind of fun and interesting, great food. But it's like, you're not here, you're not real, we're going to objectify you and diminish you, devalue you, all of that. And we continue to do that by perpetuating horrific. I mean, I think I've used horrific a couple times here, stereotypes. And this is a perfect example. The 5 Chinese brothers who all dressed and looked exactly alike, right? So this was published in 1952. But as I've said before, obviously really racist, obviously incredibly stereotyped, not a good thing to have around. Guess what? It's around. It's all over the place, which means it's in the hands of children, it's in classrooms, and it's perpetuating, I don't want to say horrific again, I'll say wretched stereotypes. So a quote from a girl in one of those classrooms. When I was a child, the teacher read, "Once upon a time, there were 5 Chinese brothers and they all looked exactly alike. Cautiously, the pairs of eyes stole a quick glance back. I, the child, looked down at the floor. The teacher turned the book our way. Bilious yellow skin, slanted slit eyes. Not only were the brothers lookalikes, but so were all the other characters in the book. Quickly again, all eyes flashed back at me as I sank into my seat." Just like, oh my gosh, not only not having representation and reflection of your own life, but just to be just spotlighted in such a stereotypical yucko way. And it continues. So this is a book, Tiki Tiki Timbo. It's in all the classrooms. It's really popular still. People give me books as a preschool teacher. They give me, here's some children's books, and I get this like at least once a year, which I promptly put into the trash. So the deal is, it just was supposedly an ancient Chinese myth, told beautifully in this illustrated book. Of course, it was written by a dominant culture white individual who obviously didn't really look into the integrity of that Chinese myth. And if you look at the illustrations, that is Japanese clothing, not Chinese clothing. So again, we perpetuate this stuff here and now, right now. Even this book's been around in like in the 60s or whatever. It's everywhere. And just a quick look at teaching curriculum on, the internet, which teachers get all sorts of sources doing that. Tons of lesson plans on Tiki Tiki Timbo. All over the place. So, I like this quote. I hope that people realize that Tiki Tiki Timbo contains very incorrect information about Chinese culture. Naming your first child a long, long name and second child a name of little or nothing is not true at all in Chinese culture. Tiki Tiki Timbo, no sa rimbo, cherry berry, ruchi pip, perry pimbo. Ugh. Simply bears no resemblance to a Chinese name. So the deal is, like they say at the end, the author should have done some homework before writing the story, right? So, and I sure am not dissing myths or anything at all, right? The folk tales and myths are fabulous from all cultures, and they need to be in our children's hands in classrooms, in libraries. But that can't be the only source, right? The danger of that single story really is quite clear here, that if we just hang on to stereotypes, we're going to get just crummy representation, really negative representation of a huge part of our citizenryship. Is that a word? So again, folktales, fabulous, right? But they can't be the only story. They can't be the only way that we see Vietnamese American children, right? Because what do we do if we just only use the folktales, if we only use some of the myths that are so beautiful and interesting, is that we just, again, perpetuate those myths of like a lot of Asian American cultures as being frozen in time. A lot of Asian cultures, I mean, as being frozen in time. And that makes our Asian American citizens like, not real. Again, diminishing. Where are you from? Perpetual foreigners. All of that has been reproduced in children's books, and it's getting a lot better for sure. But there's still some creaky old teachers out there, I'm sure, pulling out the myths for anybody who's not white. Different times of the year, we're going to get your folk tales and myths and your food and festivals and all of that. Or we're going to do something like do really stupid things. Like, this is a stupid looking book, right? I mean, they don't even look Hawaiian, those stupid kids on the cover. Sorry. And just can't underscore that we got to go beyond. We want to know about these things because they're just amazing and fabulous and interesting and fun and just great. But that can't be the only part of cultures that we learn about, because then we objectify so many of the people in our nation. I never use that word. So again, over and over again, what we see when we objectify or just freeze people in another different world and not the contemporary world that they can be in, we just make a mess of it. And then, of course, the whole idea that so many people coming from a beautiful and strong culture want to uphold that culture, right? But they also want to be recognized as Americans, right? So I mean, and how long does that take? How many generations does that take? So how do we solve some of that? You know what I'm going to say about that is that we got to look at authentic representation. So we're looking specifically at children's books, nowhere else, right? So we need to change those messages. I'm going to just say it all the time. So there's a body of let's see, let me make sure I got it right. Asian Pacific Islander Desi American children's literature. It's getting so much better. It's just so cool. So again, embracing your culture, but keeping it contemporary sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. Wow, what a way for other children to relate and children of that culture to relate to today, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't put in the myths and fairy tales and the really cool stuff. That's got to happen too. And there's some beautiful ones out there. So in a nutshell, what? It's so important to be reflected and represented in your society. That's just the underpinning message of this whole dang class. And a good way to be reflected in your society, represented in your society, and to see other cultures and and social cultures and ethnicities and all the above in your society is to have your hands on some really good, diverse, multicultural children's literature. Ta-da! Thank you. I'll stop for now.